Hello, good afternoon. I'm Louise Tutt, Deputy Editor of Screen International, and very warm welcome to a very special panel this afternoon with three leading gatekeepers of the UK film industry. Film4, BBC Film and the BFI form the nexus of independent and art house filmmaking in the UK and help to nurture the ambitions of burgeoning writers and directors, often going on to support them throughout their careers. For the next hour, we're going to be talking about how the accelerated changes of the past year are being interpreted by our three speakers, whose personal tastes and greenlight power have such an impact on UK independent filmmaking. I'm going to start by asking each of our speakers to give a brief overview of their role themselves, how much each of their organisations invests annually in film, and to highlight some of the projects on each of their slates. So, Daniel, may I start with you?
Sure. It's obviously a very interesting time to be in the film business in general, as we sort of try to work out what's going on. So much has happened over the last year. It's changed so much about people's patterns of consuming entertainment. So we've obviously got to pay attention to that. At the same time, I think we need to remain consistent. We need to continue to do what we're here to do, which is to support British filmmakers. And that's pretty much what we've been doing. I mean, in fact, it's been an incredibly active period, even though the sort of end user part of the situation in terms of exhibition has been on hold for so long. It hasn't prevented the production side, and we still have our annual budget at about £23 million to spend on development and production, we've got quite a few films in post and quite a few films coming up to go into production over the next 6 to 9 months to a year. So some of the films that we have in post are things like Eva Hussan's Mothering Sunday, Emil Amin's Boxing Day, and then and Jim Archer's Brian and Charles, and then looking forward to this year, a mix of films, some of which that had been originally slated for production in last year, and we had to move into this year, has meant that it's a very packed year. And amongst the films that we'll be putting into production this year, we have a Jonathan Glazer film, we have a Martin McDonagh film, we have Yorgos Lanthimos' next film, and then we'll also, as part of our slate, we always have a portion for debut filmmakers. So again, that side of things will also be very active and has remained a kind of consistent part of our remit from the very start of Film4.
Lizzie, can we come to you next? And I know that you're working on several films, the same with Daniel.
Yes, I mean, we have a lot of crossover with both Daniel and Rose, but I mean, if you just want to have a kind of recap on our funds, we've got a budget of 16 million, of which 2 goes to Doc Society to look after documentaries. We have development of 2.5 and Vision Awards, 1 million. And we have a talent network, the network, which is 2.5 million, 2.5 million. So very much emerging talent is very much sort of at the heart of what we're doing, but we're also supporting second, third features. You know, we have our priorities on our website, and everyone can see that's very much how we sort of think about things. We, as you know, we're not commissioners, we're funders, so we're reacting to applications. And I think it's fair also to say it's about communal taste. We're a very collegiate team. Our editorial discussions are very far ranging and very lively, and so there's a really good group within the editorial team, and we draw in expertise from other aspects of the BFI, the bits of the BFI, to make decisions on production. So it's not about my taste per se, it's about a collective taste, and it's not about the taste of the senior execs, it's a collective taste, and it's a really good process and a good way of sort of making decisions. Obviously, again, the titles that Daniel's mentioned, but we obviously incredibly proud in terms of demonstrating what the BFI is now. I mean, it's films like Rocks and Ammonite and St Maud and Afterlove, Souvenir 2, which is coming up, Ali and Ava, which is coming up. So it's kind of a real breadth. We've got, in the next month, we've got 3 debuts being released: Wildfire by Kathy Brady, Surge by Neil Carrier, and Afterlove by Aleem Khan. So kind of, again, I think it really shows how much we've done to sort of reposition our cultural output and kind of really make, I suppose, a diverse range of voices the heart of our work. And that's been going on for a good few years.
Rose, would you be able to tell us a little bit about your slate, what you're working on, how much BBC Film invests a year? Well, let's, until Rose, Rose is back in, sorry.
Don't ask,
Rose.
sorry.
We're coming to
I
you
I pressed the parachute button, didn't I, by mistake?
By mistake.
Short description of what we're doing, which is to sort of echo what Lizzie and Daniel have said, which is in a really incredibly intense and tough year, it's actually been more dynamic and more creative and more productive than I think when we first went into lockdown we could possibly imagine. And that's been about protecting and supporting the filmmakers who thought their films were going to be being made. It's about coming up with really good plans for the filmmakers whose films release has been delayed, and it's about making sure that that extra time we got before many films went into production was used not so the films curdled, but so they became their absolute best version. You know, there was space to look at them, there was sort of lots of space around casting decisions, and that felt exciting. And I think for us, you know, the BBC also had such a powerful year, and for film in the BBC, it became a space of proper sort of cultural impact and collaboration. And I think, again, those opportunities came out of the, you know, the position we were all put in with the pandemic. So whether that was normal people or the sort of holistic space that Steve had with Small Acts, or so many different, and our BBC Two season that we did with the BFI of a lot of the lower budget films coming out to audience in a season, in a peer season, with great introductions by young critics. So it was about keeping the dynamism going, about how people were watching and what they were watching, but most of all, you know, reminding people what public service could do in this environment. And now we're back shooting, you know, in such an intense way. I think we've had 15 films since lockdown began, either in production or locked. The biggest challenge, as everybody on this call knows, and I'm sure across the whole, you know, 2 days you've had, is crews and equipment, and how we collectively come together to make sure that, you know, the independent film landscape is resourced properly in terms of who makes, you know, that not everything's taken up by inward investment.
I think, can I just to back up what Rose said, I think, you know, there's been so much focus on, you know, kind of how the sort of pandemic has been so great for streamers, but it's actually public broadcasters like the BBC and Channel 4, the amazing work that the BFI did to sort of support independent film distribution and exhibition, that actually I think are the sort of real heroes of this period. And the fact that we were able to remain, I mean, that all our teams were able to remain so focused and so active, so that films kept getting made. And as I say, as hopefully now things start to open up, exhibition starts to come into the equation again, and we're able to actually get, you know, we've got, as I'm sure you have, Rose, a host of films. You know, we've got Edgar Wright's film Last Night in Soho, we've got everybody's talking about Jamie, films like Limbo and The Father have all been sort of held in this kind of holding pattern, ready to come into release. Dream Horse is just about to release in the US. So it's kind of like, that's the fulfillment, if you like, of all the work that's been done. But I think, as Rose said, both BBC and Channel 4 have sort of really proven themselves and have been very incredibly popular during this period, because they are public broadcasters, they are so respected, and their output, I think, has been really kind of on point.
No, that's a good one, and let's tease that out a little bit more, and let's tackle the big one. You know, audiences have become used to consuming entertainment, including films at home, and also now UK producers have more funding doors open to them with the arrival of the streamers in the UK as real film financiers, and there are simply now more alternatives for filmmakers who used to make films for the cinema can we talk a little bit about what that means for you as public funders? Is your role changing? And Rose and Daniel, does that mean you're having difficult conversations with, you know, your colleagues at the big channels, as it were? Perhaps Rose?
I mean, I think it's really easy to talk about the streamers are part of the landscape, and they're an exciting part of the landscape. And I think the more choice talent have and producers have, it puts us all on our manners and makes us all better at our jobs. And I think the key thing is that one size doesn't fit all. And actually, in this sort of multiplicity of choice, public service and the way we commission and why we build and what we're there to do becomes ever more important. And it's about specificity, it's about care, it's about authorship, it's about retention of rights, which people don't talk about very often, but I think is a really, increasingly important space to acknowledge about, if you make something for the BBC or Channel 4 or with the BFI, you still own what you've made. And I think, talent are savvy enough to understand that different spaces will fit different projects. You watch Helston on Netflix and you just think, I'm so glad that's in the world. But then I watch what we're doing and you just go, only the BBC could make it and only the BBC could broadcast it to the, it's the linear channels are still enormous, iPlayer is still huge, and just that sheer cultural impact, as well as the fact that we can make things that the market didn't know they needed. We're there to, keep the landscape and the space open and supple and alive. We're not reactive, we're expansive. So I think it shouldn't be a binary conversation. I think the energy and the dynamism and the funding that streamers have brought in is really exciting. And I think it's probably made many more people excited about a career in television and film. And I think that's only a good thing. And I think we all, it's a kind of joint effort to just keep making great work, but to keep reminding people that that great work can be made in different spaces and that probably, different sorts of work suit different spaces. So it kind of becomes too easy to look at the streamers as other, something over there, something that's going to kind of take up our space, and sometimes it is challenging. And I do get envious of their giant pocketbooks, but that makes us more supple, more dynamic, more careful, more thoughtful, and I hope more supportive.
Lizzie, you're nodding a lot.
I would echo Rose. We're about risk, and we've always been about risk. And we can take chances on projects that even, Film 4 and BBC, understandable reasons, can't necessarily back. So we're always about kind of giving chances to people. And, it's interesting to me the way you kind of, you spend, a long time developing a project, which, we don't develop with an end user in mind because we're very Catholic in that way as funders. But it's always interesting to me when you sort of spend a lot of time on a project and then suddenly you find that a certain streamer wants it, and you think, well, it's like, we put the time into a new piece of talent, put the time into the script, fantastic, but it's that sort of sense that, we're taking the risk, we're putting our neck out always and supporting particularly new talent, which needs a lot of hand holding. I always sort of laughed when we had a project which we shared with Film 4, where there was a certain film called You Were Never Really Here, and I just remember it it was Lynn Ramsey's film at Cannes, and it was sort of a feeling that Amazon had sort of taken it over. And I just do remember us, Daniel, you and me, and Sue Bruce Smith standing by the poster saying, "We are here," because we were very much. And it was a project I worked with Rose on too when she was at Film 4. We drove that project. So it's kind of, it's just reminding the world that we can take risks on quite tricky material. And that's really important. And culturally, that's really important in terms of also taking risks on voices. And obviously, Lynn was a very established voice, but voices that are kind of just beginning to sort of find their idiom.
Daniel, do you find the writers and directors you're working with, are they considering the end user as Lizzie puts it, at a much earlier stage? And are you encouraging them to do so, or are you sort of end user agnostic?
I wouldn't say we're end user agnostic in that, we are here mainly to make feature films for theatrical exhibition. But I mean, like, filmmakers are, the same as you and I. They're in the world, they live in the world we live in, and the world that we live in is a world that is, dominated to a certain extent by the streaming experience. So they're well aware of that. In a way, they're well aware of the strengths and the weaknesses of it as a new filmmaker. On the one hand, yes, it's an option that perhaps wasn't there, however many years ago to get your film made. On the other hand, once you are in that world, you're in it with thousands of other pieces of content, and there's no guarantee that you will have the sort of the care and attention that Lizzie and Rose have both talked about, the development of your career, the ownership of your rights, the ability to take your mum to the premiere. I mean, all those things go away. But that isn't to say that it can't be a very good option. Of course it is. And again, as both Lizzie and Rose has mentioned, the money side of things, of course, is important. As you're trying to build a portfolio or building a career, you need to get stuff made, and the streamers have large appetites and large bank balances, and they're able sometimes to spend more on films than we are. But that isn't always the case. And the other thing that that we do have as a big advantage is we, as well as the relationship with filmmakers that we've built over the years, and that tradition is also a very strong development pool. So a lot of material that we're able to develop in conjunction with filmmakers and allow to have the time to come to the sort of place that it needs to come to in order to be kind of ready to make this the sort of move into production. So listen, it's always been a competitive environment, whether it's us competing with each other. Now there are some major competitors in the market. They've been coming for a while. It's no surprise. Of course, it's been a little bit, well, it's been fast-tracked by the last year or so, just because of the circumstances that we've all been aware of. But it sort of doesn't change things that dramatically. It just means that we need to be that much more focused on what we're here to do, and again, all the things that have been referenced, to take those extra risks, to support those filmmakers, and sometimes it does mean supporting them into a relationship with a streamer. And in those cases, we need to do everything we can to sort of protect our own rights within that relationship, whether it is branding, whether it is some, a window of some sort. All of those things are part of any relationship, any business relationship that we have with the streamer. It's hard work. Those negotiations are really, really difficult, but it's sort of the access point required in order to access into everything that we can bring to the table.
I would add curatorially, so important that things like the iPlayer, BBC iPlayer and BFI Player event in November, and as Rose was saying, the curatorial care, particularly important as with the new voices emerging. And actually that wasn't just new voices, but people begin, the early stages of their career, can be second, third film. And I think things like that was a really great example of the precision and care. And that might not always happen with as we've acknowledged with streamers. You go into a space.
One of the themes mentioned in the panel earlier today was about the question was raised about where the new generation of bold voices for cinema, sort of writers, auteur directors, are going to come from. So many are drawn to TV, and theatres have been dark for a year, and theatres are always a place of experimentation. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing and what more you think your organisations can do to support these and bring in these new voices, so writers, auteurs? I mean, Lizzie, I know that the BFI works a lot in this area. So,
I mean, obviously for us, network is so essential. It's literally a network across the UK, sort of access points for early stage career development, early stage sort of ideas. Really, really important. I think that what's coming across all the time at the moment is the need for more writers. But I think, you know, that there's a lot of places that, you know, those voices can come through. And obviously the BBC Writers' Room, which is just now, Jess Loveland is going to go work there, which is fantastic, you know, who was head of network for us. So there's kind of a sense of real commitment to, you know, finding those voices and giving the space to fail as well as succeed, and maybe fail and then succeed. We know that careers can take some time to you know, to take off fully. I always think of David Bowie or Halston as great examples where, to begin with, you know, they weren't really cutting it. Just to show that you actually really need that sort of R&D space, which I think is very much intrinsic to the BFI's ethos of you know, working with people, but giving them this space to experiment. And network is intrinsic to that. And also, you know, within the Film Fund, we, you know, a majority of our work at the moment is first features.
Rose, the BBC has such a strong tradition. Yeah, sorry, carry on.
So, you know, theatres have been dark, but voices haven't gone silent. You know, you just look at how much new writing migrated online and how many, you know, authors and young authors organised space for themselves. And so our job came to find them in the space that they were existing in. And I think being very willing to develop very young voices, because, you know, it's that support and that protection. And I think our collective obligation of everybody on this call is how that generation, particularly of playwrights or even, you know, young makers who really want to enter this industry, and I really include producers in that, because we can't make good films without great producers. We keep reminding them that this is a great career and it's full of possibility, and that it's those sort of ghost generation that we've thought about and talked about a lot over the last year. So that's been talking to theatres, you know, watching every online piece of work, going to YouTube, and being really open around meeting those young voices on their terms. So not putting them in genre boxes, not telling them who they are, asking them who they are, you know, managing expectations really carefully. That actually, you know, we have to get the scripts into a shape that will protect them when they come out as a film, if we should at that point. And I think one of the things that's happening, particularly around writers and some young directors, is, you know, not necessarily an enormous duty of care in the industry as a whole, because if you take on that much work and that much work at that level, you know, it becomes quite transactional, and it becomes much less about who that person is and the longevity of their career and the finding of their voice and the nuance of their voice. It becomes about what they're delivering to these different platforms and homes. And it also becomes, you know, are they hot? You know, have I got them? And I think we really want to do a counter narrative to that, which is about protection, safe space, possibility, and building teams that make people understand that collaboration, sort of, it's not about immediate huge paychecks immediately, and it's not about getting something made too quickly. It's about getting it made in the right pace at the right time that will go on to deliver a career where it's full of choices, whether that's staying in public service, staying in low budget, making studio films, going back to theatre. But our job as, you know, people who all work in public service is to protect those people that are going to define the cultural landscape in this country.
I think it's also interesting to note we're seeing people come through who may be maturer and who may have felt outsiders in the industry until the last couple of years. So I think that's a really interesting phenomenon of the sort of the talent that's sort of languished or has not found its way. And that to me is a really important part of now, as well as the sort of younger emerging talent.
Yeah, and I think, you know, from our point of view, I think the important thing is that that emerging talent is not talking to me. It's talking to a fantastic team of people that we have in our creative development who are the same age, who live the same sort of lives, and who can talk the same language, so that they can communicate in such a way and feel like they've got like-minded people to talk to, so that as they develop their material, they're both the sort of creator and the audience is being looked after at the same time. And I think that's vitally important as well, because otherwise, you know, just of course I've got lots of experience in the business, etc., but in a way you want those that sort of material to sort of be allowed to develop and flourish before having to actually hit that point where you have to make commercial decisions about it.
Talking of commercial decisions, I was going to talk a little bit about how, you know, the tastes of BFI, BBC Film4 have always, well, for a while now, have been very progressive, very bold. You've all adopted the diversity guidelines developed by the BFI, and it's very much evident in the work that you are supporting now. But to what extent do you think the private sector and the commercially driven distributors and exhibitors are catching up with this, particularly following the events of the last year and the ongoing impact of things like the Black Lives Matter protests? Is the commercial sector more receptive? Is it too early to say?
Shall I? I mean, I think it's, you know, the industry as a whole, as so much of the civilization that we live in, is not sort of, you know, not well adjusted basically in terms of diversity, and our industry is no different. I think, as you say, we've all had as part of our kind of DNA that to represent all aspects and all cultures, but we have to we all have to do more. We all have to make sure that we're supportive of those filmmakers and actually sort of you know, put our faith in that and demonstrate that we are true to it. But the industry as a whole definitely needs further changes. I mean, it's good that, you know, as I mentioned before, you know, we've made this movie Boxing Day with Amin, and we've done a deal in the UK with Warner Brothers to distribute it. So that's, I think, a good sign to demonstrate that there are other people in the more sort of major part of the business who are prepared to be supportive and who understand that there's an audience for different types of voices, and for, I mean, just for another way of looking at material. But you know, it's sort of interesting when we were working with Nina Young Bon Jovi on who produced Passing with us, Rebecca Hall's movie. You know, she was very interesting to just discuss the way she saw the industry as a whole, and that's sales agents, producers, the acquisitions environment, et cetera. When you sort of see it from a different point of view, you realize that mostly the industry is aimed in a particular direction, and it's going to take quite a bit of education and quite a bit of sort of material to sort of work successfully in order to change some of those preconceived conditions.
Do you agree with that, Rose?
I would actually not argue, but I think we have to be really thoughtful about words like bold and progressive, because I don't think we are bold and progressive. I think we are representing the UK in its best self and its best form. And, you know, this whole idea of, you know, that there's any space that's challenging. What's challenging is getting great films made, that the authors who've made them are proud and believe in them, and then getting that film its best possible life through distribution and a great space on the BBC when it comes on. And I think, you know, even the idea of sort of a reactive commercial thing to the, you know, Black Lives Matter was a sort of moral human rights movement. And I think everybody on this call and everybody in independent British film, you know, has been and has to keep putting inclusion at its center. And what's so exciting about that is not only is it the moral sort of no-brainer, it's also the culturally most exciting space. It's the friction of stories, it's the excitement of new perspective, it's narratives that aren't stale and old and are detroping, and, you know, it's counter narrative, it's written in the way that we live it, but we didn't get to see it. And so I think this thing of talking about it as a sort of separate space has to really stop. Inclusion, it's just who people are.
I agree completely, and I kind of feel that there's been a lot of catch up commercially, but to me it's been such a waste of talent in the many years that I've worked in the industry and seen projects so falter because it's perceived as not an audience, and now everyone is catching up on that, because also, you know, we've always seen diversity to Rose's point, as to completely, just endemic to a fruitful, good life. But now people might see that it's also can make money for people, and I think that's where the sort of commercial industry has caught up. I mean, when I started out in the industry many years ago, I worked for a very small distribution company that took on Horace Ove's Playing Away, and it was a real eye-opener into this no audience issue, and how hard we had to work to prove to the world there was an audience for the film. And then cut to working with Destiny Carragher on Gone Too Far, and again that was like 30 years on plus, no audience for this film, and again the team proved there was an audience. Whereas I think now, and again in maybe quite a micro way, but there was an audience, and I kind of think if it was magnified by a bold distribution company who just understood and took it out to the massive audience there was for both those projects, I feel like that's in the last few years there's been catch up that's been needed for the history of the industry, the history of the world.
But I mean, I think that's the point, in a way, that we're part of an overall ecology. We can do our part. We need to bring various other parts of the industry along with us, or we're just sort of shouting into a vacuum. And I think, again, just by sort of the constant support and the repetition of those messages, the support of those filmmakers, we will continue to break through. But it does need, we need sales agents, we need exhibition distribution to sort of back up our support, if you like.
And I think now we have the press and the social media that can magnify great work and get work out there and connect them with the audiences too, which is obviously sort of a huge distinction. That back to Rose's point about sort of the New Voices season, it was young critics talking with young filmmakers, that dialogue is happening, that sort of dialogue, audience, critic, social media. There's a sort of sustained culture to make sure good work gets distributed and found and seen and talked about.
Yeah, and it's obviously been very encouraging. We've mentioned a couple of times before, but the sort of successful road that Rocks went on was extraordinary, and it gave it a profile that it might well not have received in years gone by. Limbo as well, to be picked up by Focus, sort of suddenly you do find that a small film can get a much bigger voice if there are the sort of various supporting partners in place.
I'm going to move to some, we've got some questions from the audience, and please do keep those coming through. You might not like this one, but how do you think the economics will change for the production of films as we move further into a world where streaming giants take over and public service broadcasters lose their dominance in the commissioning market? Daniel?
I don't like it. You're right.
No.
But I don't think it's not, as we've sort of touched on before, it's not, I mean, it's challenging, but it's not kind of the end game. I think public broadcasters and organizations such as Film4, BFI and BBC Films are perceived by those challenging organizations to be a vital part. I mean, they need us at the moment anyway. Hopefully they will continue to need us. We need to make ourselves essential. And I think filmmakers and program makers still feel like we have a very important role to play. Not important as in, as in that sense of the word, but just in terms of the partnership that we're able to deliver, in terms of the development skills that we're able to bring to the party. So I think it's incredibly challenging, it's incredibly competitive, but I still see a bright future.
I also think it's, ultimately it's about a sort of bespoke build. So, if you come and make a film with BBC Film or Channel, Film4 or BFI, you have consistency of expertise, you have consistency of voices, you have extremely, accessible and brilliant business affairs and production who all work as one unit. There aren't any schismic conversations. And I think it's also about making sure we have enough money that people can get the work they want made. It's not about how much money, it's just enough money. And then producers and filmmakers are allowed to make their choices. But you look at small acts, Steve McQueen, and it could only have been on the BBC. And only the BBC could have done cinema, education, podcasts, documentaries, and an education plan to support those extraordinary films. And so I think, really remembering our collective value in this country and what we can bring to audiences and reflect back to them who they are, what their lives are, what their imaginative space is, and that work will get, treated as a precious object, each program, because we do have much less resource, but everything we make is precious, and everything we make has to be looked after, and everything we make has to be its best version of itself. So, we'll lose some and we'll win some, but I think people have to be, really, people who are really good at what they do, and filmmakers who have real passion, and producers who understand the choices will continue to curate where they choose to take their money for and what success looks like with that funding.
I suppose I can just answer as a member of the audience, because in a way, back to the fact we are just funders and we have to be, again, Catholic about where the projects go. But as a member of the audience, I like curation. I like to have that sort of sense of a piece of work being looked after and being placed, whether it's, watching something on Film 4, Channel 4, or watching something on the BBC. I like to sort of sense of that even if I end up watching it, after the fact, it's looked after, as Rose was talking about, and you feel that some curatorial thought has gone into its placing, and that is so important. To me, the answer to the future is curation, and creating those pathways for both audiences but also filmmakers to understand how they are, where they are and the map of things.
We are never casual about our choices. So if we're choosing to put money into something, that means that's something very special to us and that we really want it to work. It's not just...
I like the sense of... I like what you were saying, Rose, that everything you do is very precious. That's a...
Yeah, but and it's true. It's very true. But I'm sure, there's no doubt that some of them, there's a lot of great. I mean, Rose, you mentioned Halston, that you're, I think, the third person that's mentioned that to me today. So there's no doubt that there's some fantastic pieces of entertainment that are not appearing and we have nothing to do with. In a way, I just find that sort of, just sets a bar, and we can do it as well. We can do it as well, and we can do it better. Both our channels, you talked about small acts, Channel 4 had a huge hit with It's a Sin this year, and I don't recall anything appearing on any streamer that has made the sort of things we talked about, social impact and connection to audiences, that's something that on a free-to-air broadcaster does. It just doesn't happen. It happens entertainment, sport, whatever it is. There's no alternative to that. And I think what we do in the feature film side of things as well, also we make short films. We start careers along those lines as well. So we have a number of different ways of kind of curation and also development of talent, and I think that's still special. And I mean, it's wrong to say unique because there's more than one of us here, but it's not something that anybody and everybody can do.
And I think this year's been very much the return to, obviously for obvious reasons on the small screen, but the return to the water cooler moment, the sense of communion with lots of people, even if it's from your sitting room. And I see cinema as a kind of very comprehensive religious analogy. It's both the prayer mat and the cathedral. And I think what's been brilliant about the last year is everyone's got out their prayer mats, and to commune with something really, really exciting at the same time, or knowing that you're part of a conversation, that you're watching something that you've heard about the 2 days before. It's exciting, and I think the broadcasters have done that brilliantly this year.
Yeah, it's weird given that you're not allowed to go within 2 meters of a water cooler, that actually that there have been real water cooler moments of entertainment this year, which it's a sort of odd kind of scenario given that there's no connection between people whatsoever, physically anyway.
It's all about the metaphor this year.
Yeah.
And it shows how much audiences yearn for that, or how much people are yearning for it. We're actively looking for the water cooler moments. I've got another question here, and it's back more to sort of film budgets, film financing. Independents need strong sales estimates to drive their finance plans to reach 100%. Uncertainty about future revenue streams is a problem. Have you found that minimum guarantees are falling? Who would like to take that one?
I mean, I can take that. Yeah, it's the sort of the business environment. I mean, we've already touched upon the fact that, a lot of the financial models that we have are based on some form of worldwide box office, and we just don't know what that means anymore. I mean, we're all very hopeful that, I mean, really hopeful, not just sort of pie in the sky optimists, but really hopeful that one of the things that people really want to do, despite the fact that they've got so sort of they've got into the habit of consuming content at home, that they actually do want to get out. They do understand that cinema creates a whole different way of experiencing film, and a much better way, let's face it. So that part of it needs to kind of play into the business plan and the finance plans for movies. But certainly distribution, and they're the people who are putting up the guarantees, are nervous, I'm sure. I mean, it's been a really, really tough year for them. And in most territories, they haven't had the sort of any of the sort of support that the UK versions have. So it's an extremely challenging environment out there. But that doesn't mean there isn't still confidence. There's still, I think, when you talk to sales companies, even if it is a case of mixing and matching between traditional theatrical distribution models versus either worldwide streaming deals or more sort of specific territory streaming deals, there are ways of financing films. There are many ways of financing films. And again, people have learned through the pandemic that you've got to be as flexible as possible in order to put films together. So things have changed a lot, but there's still the hope that some part of the business will go back to actually the model that we've always based our finance plans on.
The other big,
I mean, it's just really tough. I mean, it's always been tough making films. I think it's really worth remembering that. And it continues to be tough. And it could, and your budget is always bigger than the market wants to pay for it. And that's, such is the way. But what I think we found really exciting is all our films that are either completed or shooting have all got distributors in both the UK and the US. And that's sort of better than it was a couple of years ago. So as Daniel says, there's real sort of proper kind of money where your mouth is from the distributors. And that's just been really heartening, that these films are destined for cinemas.
Another big challenge this year, impact on all of us, has been Brexit. And there's a question from the audience to all of you about, do you believe Brexit will have or has had any impact on co-production funding or production for British filmmakers? The government has announced the Global Screen Fund, but what challenges has Brexit left us with? Lizzie.
Well, obviously the BFI has just launched the Global Film Fund, so and I know there was a big conversation about that yesterday. The Film Fund continues to work on international productions. We're in the Lucille Hadjevich earwig with Film4. We are just about to start production in the summer on the first, incredibly poignantly, the first UK official Palestinian UK co-production, a film called The House in Jerusalem. And we're also in with the BBC on Ruben Osterlund's latest film. So we are still very much, business as usual in terms of, looking at projects that fulfill our criteria as the usual thing, but that we're having a very kind of robust attitude. And I think the BFI is great because it sort of has the breadth of both sort of the kind of economic imperative, but the cultural imperative as well.
What are your big takeaways from the impact of Brexit, Daniel, or do you think it's too early? Has COVID sort of covered them a bit?
I feel like
now?
it's sort of like one of those things that I know is going to be a pain in the arse, as it is in so many other things that one deals with in one's daily life, but haven't quite experienced it yet. As Lizzie said, and I'm glad that Lizzie pronounced Lucille's last name for me. But we have Earwig, we have a Belgian film, Titan. We have films being made in Europe over this year. I mentioned Jonathan Glazer's film, which is going to be made in Poland, and Yorgos Lanthimos' film, which is going to be produced out of Hungary. So there are, in a way, almost the COVID-related issues regarding those films loom so large that the Brexit-related ones sort of slightly drop down. I know there are huge issues in regard to exchange rates and stuff like that, which fortunately our fantastic finance teams deal with and just feed me the information as and when I need it. But it's bound to be more complicated and more painful. But don't quite know whether it's going to actually stop us doing things. I think, the sort of the Global Screen Fund and any support that is able to be given to British films, either being sold into international territories or to support them in distribution in those territories is going to be incredibly useful, and I'm sure will at least partially make up for some of the support schemes that were in there prior to Brexit. So it's still a little bit, as you say, a little bit early to know exactly how much impact it's going to have, and hopefully we can sort of allay some of those fears by some of the things that we're doing already, to sort of try and get ahead of it.
Rose, do you have any thoughts on Brexit?
Nothing to add. Nothing to add. It's, it's all to be revealed, I think.
Another question from the audience on a slightly different subject is asking, what are you doing reaching those talented, not so young writers, directors and producers? Which is an interesting one, isn't it? Because we tend to default to young talent, new young talent, but of course talent isn't always young.
I mean, as I said earlier, what's been interesting to me is I've seen quite a few filmmakers come through, particularly last year, who are mature. We never define emerging in terms of age. Emerging can be 55, 65 plus. We define emerging as your first or second film. But I think it's particularly interesting. If I can sort of spot a generalization, I do see women coming through who've had to have hiatuses on their careers for various reasons. And that's really exciting, and we're all arms welcome to that. We've had two first features recently by women who aren't in that kind of 20-something demographic, and that to me is very important. I've always lived by the Mary Wesley school of thought that you can have a burgeoning career in your 60s.
Like the sound of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly the success of The Father and Anthony Hopkins and Florian Zeller and Christopher Hampton and David Parfit and any number of people involved in that film certainly are not perhaps in the first flush of youth. And the film itself, appeals to an older demographic, and that older demographic is a very strong sort of audience profile for quality films. So we would be mad to kind of ignore that part of the filmmaking and the film going environment. So as with all of us, I think we're always trying to do kind of both ends of the spectrum, really, to support those new voices, and also to continue the careers and in fact work with more established filmmakers or filmmakers that are not in the first flush of youth. I think, again, if we find quality and original voices, they don't have to necessarily be young.
Agreed. I think it's who's got something to say, how do they want to say it? Why do they want to say it now? That's what matters. We're talking to quite a lot of novelists. We're talking to quite a lot of artists. We're talking to quite a lot of theatre directors who want to move into film. It's harder if you've had no purchase in any sort of making to sort of appear when you're older. But it's possible and it's exciting and we're really open to it. But you also have to be honest about that. And I think people also have to be honest that if they felt very frustrated for a long time about not getting their work made, it may be that the people that are commissioning don't want to make that work rather than ageism or anything negative. And it's also about living in the reality that very few things get made. And our collective job is to make the best things, whatever age you are. So it's complex, it's when, and as Lizzie says, when we talk about young, maybe we should say emerging. That can be any age.
And I think, again, you can, of course, mix and match. Oh, there was an echo there. Yeah, you can mix and match. I mean, you can have, like we're about to go into production with a film, with this film Living, that Kazuo Ishiguro did the adaptation. We've got a new, younger filmmaker in Oliver Hermanus directing it, a more established producer in Stephen William and Elizabeth Carlson, and, in a quite a sort of mix and match, Bill Nighy, older cast and a young cast, sort of, I think, the films can be, can sort of be all things to all men as well. They don't have to be one thing or another.
I also think it's really exciting looking at somebody like Joanna Hogg, who is making, some of the best work in the world. And she made her first feature film when I think she was, I won't say her age, but, when she'd had another full career.
I think that's a very good example of someone who gave herself permission to make films after a career in television. And yeah, to Rose's point, is at the top of her game.
I've got another question that I'm going to ask each of. Well, it's not really a question. I'm going to ask each of you for your response to this statement. The last year has shown us just what we've missed as audiences, and the next few years will actually be a golden era for cinemas and theatrical filmmaking and UK films. I'm wondering what your response to that would be, if anyone wants to jump in.
I mean, on the one hand, the last year when we had that sort of small opening in the autumn, a lot of smaller films have actually been incredibly well reviewed and have been quite visible. And that's been quite exciting. They've sort of had much more space in terms of, in the media and with critics, and just generally getting more, more noticed than in other really busy years. So I don't think we should look on this year as a sort of lost year. I think we should look at this year as a year where, people met work in a different way. But I do think that the next couple of years is going to be extraordinary. Just the backlog of films I know we've got, BFI have got, Film4 have got, and you multiply that across, all the sort of funders and distributors. And I think it's just about making sure that in that sort of embarrassment of riches, that the new voices and the smaller films, still get amplified, still get seen, still get noticed.
I think all the things
oh, sorry, go on, Lizzie.
All the things that we've learned from this year, it's obviously been an incredibly difficult and challenging year, but I think there's also been some not just incredibly good filmmaking work, but incredibly good ways of seeing films in terms of the sort of curated special one-off event, something like Bird's Eye View doing the work that they've been doing in terms of getting conversations around films online. I think for me, the best Sundance I've ever had was the online Sundance, because I didn't have to get jet lagged and have altitude sickness, and I had an incredible time watching films with all my colleagues, because we could all afford to go virtually. So I kind of think as we adjust the future, it's about making sure that as Rose is saying, those small films really shine and take the good things out of the curatorial work that's happened this year, in terms of thinking about how we watch films and enjoying a kind of hybridity. Personally, for me, that is the way to go. And I kind of feel that's very important. As much the kind of the placing of the films as the making of them. But certainly, I think we're in an incredible era of artistic sort of innovation and voices. That's to me really exciting. So yes, I mean it's hard, can't call it yet, but I do feel excited about the future because I'm seeing incredibly new voices coming through, and I'm really curious to see what they're going to be saying.
Are you optimistic, Daniel?
I'm always optimistic. I think, again, just sort of following on what both Rose and Lizzie have said, and just taking that into the sort of industry space, I think although a lot of things have kind of been slightly put in aspic during this last year, it's actually, there's also a lot of sort of actual positive changes that have been forced on the industry as a whole that I think will be supportive of the films that we love and that we want to get seen. I think the fact that some of these rigid release patterns and rigid windowing, etc., are going to finally disappear, allowing more flexibility, allowing the audiences to decide when and where they want to see films, I think is going to be really helpful for our movies to make sure that they have an opportunity to, the fact that so many of the studios have their own streaming services, are on a sort of more or less day and date situation with those, allows our films that have different release patterns to perhaps have the opportunity to get more profile. I think the media, as you said, Rose, I think the media have become aware of just how our film, some of these films that we're talking about really deserve to be cherished, and if they are given sufficient profile, audiences will respond incredibly well to them. Critics will respond incredibly well to them. They are of interest to people. They may be small, but that doesn't mean that they don't have connectivity to lots of people's different ways of life. So I think there's a lot of things to be optimistic about, and I think the general sort of change in the way that the industry, that has been in many ways stuck in the past for a long time, has been sort of fast tracked into the future, I think is cause for optimism, and I think is changing the way in which film sits in the cultural landscape.
Thank you. I've got one last question for you all, and then I think it's the end of our time together. Are you all planning to go to Cannes this year? Are we waiting and seeing?
Yeah, I think we're all. I think we're all waiting to see. Obviously, in terms of kind of a presence, we will have a virtual presence, whatever. Lots of good things are being planned for the virtual market. But yes, I think, well, certainly at the BFI, we're keeping an eye on things like everyone else.
It feels like it could be a good year for UK films in the festival. Fingers crossed.
It often feels like that at this point, and then the announcement comes out. But yeah, no, I think it is. I think as Lizzie said, I think the festivals as a whole have done a pretty good job, and an increasingly good job, of either being virtual or being some sort of a hybrid. Cannes is Cannes. I desperately want to go there, but the circumstances would need to feel kind of safe and feel like it was that it required one's attendance there, as opposed to just, of course we all want our films to be supported by that festival, because it's a wonderful appreciation of the very best in film.
So bags aren't quite packed.
Not quite, but albeit people just do nothing in August in Shepherd's Bush. Shepherd's Bush multiplex, if not, because there are some great films coming out this summer, whether it begins in, whether it's in Cannes or here. And I think one of the things we've been sort of surprised by in the BBC film team is, without even realizing it, how many comedies we've commissioned and made, and actually how pleased we are just, that we all need some joy in our lives, basically. And that's what I can't wait to go back to cinema and have a giggle.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Well, that seems a wonderful place to end. I'd like to thank you all so much for a very illuminating conversation. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you to the audience for listening. So thank you, Lizzie Francke, Editor-at-Large at the BFI, Rose Garnett, Director of BBC Film, and Daniel Battsek, Director of Film4. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.